Thank you, Govan. That was a dare, by the way, everyone. But I felt like we had to sing something about being back. So thanks, Anne, for letting us do it on the panel.
Thank you,
also,
Debbie,
it's the first time someone's got me up to moderate. So maybe that's to celebrate my 10 years. Normally
Yes.
I'm in the back. And it is such a pleasure to welcome our esteemed panelists. And this is actually the second year that we've shared and participated in this procurement survey. And I think what's really great about what we're about to discuss is unpacking what those facts and figures mean. Otherwise, they're just really stats, and 10% of people come up with stats in the world. Did anyone get that? Okay. So you may know the faces of our panelists, starting from the right. It's not ladies first, because Derek, you get to go first. You're horribly outnumbered.
Thank you very much.
And Derek KINNEAR, many of you, he's been on our panels before and spoken at Smart Procurement World, but you'll remember him ex-MD of Bidvest Procurement, but also interesting, his extensive experience, First National Bank, RMB, and he's also done some really interesting things around FIFA. So I think if you want to catch him during lunch or tea, you can ask him a bit more about that. So Derek, thank you for taking time to join us. And then Anne, who's also been since the last 2 years, has from Oxalys, Managing Director of Oxalys South Africa.
Sure.
And you're going to love her accent as she answers. And believe it or not, she's from the Caribbean. So again, another conversation you can have with her.
Thank you.
And Lerato SEBATA, also extensive experience in the financial sector. Also interesting because you wear both hats. You've been in public sector, private sector, ICT, and even Africa, procurement into West Africa. So I think you're going to bring a lot to this discussion. But if any of you are any good on social media, she's on LinkedIn and very good on Instagram. So has anyone followed Lerato with procurement? So what I love about Lerato is she's making it fun. Can I say sexy? So thank you for making procurement fresh. And again, we're looking forward to the conversation. So I presume someone's going to be flipping through our slides here, we hope. So if we can have the, maybe from the back. I see they're looking for it right now, so that's probably not a good thing, but we'll talk through it. So we're going to look at, first of all, the context of the survey. We're going to look at procurement key strategies and practices, digital transformation perspectives, and hopefully some time for Q&A, because I think there might be some really interesting questions coming from our audience. And seeing as this was an Oxalys brainchild and something that we've enjoyed doing with CIPS and Smart Procurement.
Yeah.
Maybe just give us the context and the demographics of the survey.
Definitely, yeah. So we started this initiative, I think it was 2 years ago. We wanted, to provide a key highlight on the emerging trends and practices of procurement here in South Africa. And we wanted to do that while capturing the uniqueness of the South African context, right? So that's why we decided to launch this initiative, and I would never thank Debbie, and especially Smart Procurement World and CIPS Africa, because, again, they help us a lot with communicating this survey out there, so thank you again. And yes, if we want to have a quick overview of the respondents' profile, we will say that most of them are procurement leaders, CPO, head of procurement, supply chain directors from South Africa. We have a pretty well representation of different industries and company size. In terms of industry, we have a well representation from the public sector and NPOs, so non-profit organizations, and also manufacturing and a bit of health and IT sector. So that's what we've been able to collect. The data were collected earlier this year. We've got, I think, 119 respondents, all from South Africa, so we are pretty happy with the result, and I hope you will enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Anne. And I think it was also encouraging to see how many leaders took time to complete the survey, and also the fact that it is a representative around public and private sector. And we know some of the elements and dynamics can be quite different for procurement, and I'm sure Lerato is going to be alluding to that a little later. So the first, team, we're not getting this presentation, so we're going to have to talk you through it. So what was interesting is the first section we looked at was localization and inclusivity. And 50% said that, I have to bring it a bit closer, and it's not that I'm getting that old, but they ensure spend is driven to local suppliers fairly and in an inclusive manner. So that was kind of what they felt was the most important around localization, inclusivity. Lerato, you've had extensive experience, again, many industry bodies that you've worked with. What is your take on that particular statistic?
Because it's dominating localization, I can agree to that. In particular, that BEE is the major driver for localization. So I think the fact that it is implemented, it is enforcing the type of sourcing decisions to be more focused around localization and giving local companies an uplift. So I can predominantly agree, although we would have maybe seen an uptake of the numbers instead of 50-something%, but maybe with time, as we go on, it might just get to 70 or 80.
Absolutely. And what was interesting was that 45% said that improving supply experience is also very important in order to deliver more strategic value for procurement. And I think that's really a case of approaching that more from a supplier relationship management point of view than just a BEE tick box exercise, which you will unpack a little bit further in our discussion. The next slide, you see, well practiced. The next question that we looked at was actually procurement's key priorities and challenges in 2022. Now, it's no surprise that given the panel discussions that we've just had where we looked at VUCA, yet another common word that everyone's using every second, that and pivot, but we definitely think VUCA is more interesting. So 53% said that reducing supply risk to ensure supply continuity was really one of the most important aspects. And given that, I'd like to ask you, Derek, what do you think around supplier risk? And, again, you've had experience in an organization like Bidvest where it's quite, all your different companies working as different functions.
Yeah. Debbie, before I say that, I think I just listened to the previous speakers. To all the delegates in the room, I think you need to know that you are the people that make economic growth a reality. So we can look at statistics, we can look at what's going down here, but I think, and I heard earlier on what they're saying is let's bring importance to procurement, but I think what you need to know is that you do make a significant difference to economic growth. So you need to give ourselves a hand for that. But I think if we look at risk, we touched on risk yesterday, and I'm not going to belabor the point. I think what I've seen in terms of all the exercises that we've done, whether we talk about financial services sector, whether we talk about the industrial sector, or whether we talk about the Brazilian World Cup, because that's the one I actually managed was the Brazilian World Cup. If you look at risk, it's not about being reactive. If you're reactive, you're history. You are history. What you need to do is you need to be proactive. And I think we touched on this a little earlier, and we also touched it in one of the master classes yesterday, is to be proactive, you need to be on top of your information. And I also heard one of the previous speakers say earlier on, they're on top of their spend analysis. That's one aspect. Spend analysis is one minuscule aspect. So I think if you're going to be mitigating any risk in the future, know who you're dealing with, know your suppliers, know exactly what they're spending, know exactly what they are doing with you, where they're getting their services, where they're getting their people from. And I think at the same time, if we're looking at localizing, what we need to make sure is that when we are doing business with these suppliers, when I talk local, I'm not talking about local being South Africa. I'm talking about local being Northern Cape. I'm talking about local being Eastern Cape, KZN, Gauteng. That's what we talk about local. And if to understand that diversification, if you don't understand what your information looks like at that level, you're going to be reactive and you're going to have a lot of risk to deal with. So I think that's really one of the main issues, be proactive.
Certainly pertinent. And Lerato, maybe you can talk a little bit to the agility aspect. So yes, we can be risk averse, we can mitigate as far, but I think COVID proved us all that, I remember talking to a lot of CPOs at the time and said, how's your disaster plans? Are they in place? And they went, not so much, or if they are in place, none of them considered a scenario of COVID. And, what are those black swan events? So how does an organization and a procurement team look at being agile for the organization?
I think for me it starts with the procurement professionals themselves, making a conscious decision to be flexible, to be agile in how you do things, because we are predominantly known for long processes. If you take a project in procurement, people start being deflated, that's going to take 6 months. And that's the change that we need to start first with ourselves. In finding process improvements within the process, that can enable you to come across as agile. And at the same time, I know few organizations that implement agile methodology, and as procurement, how are you aligning to that methodology to fit into the business? And in that, you'll be able to promptly deliver. At the same time, we include automation, digitization that speaks to agility. Part of our processes are very manual. So if you can look into spots that you can digitize, that can promote the agility, then absolutely you can win it.
I think we're going to talk to an interesting stat about being very manual, but that's still coming. And for the team at the back, we're on slide number 5. I don't know if you can show that now that we've got the slides. Because I'd like to look at the second graph, and that graph in particular was what are the challenges that we're seeing for procurement currently. And it's not going to surprise you, but again, it's still pretty interesting what we're seeing. So 53% said the biggest, so that was really the biggest objective and challenge, was that getting procurement involved early enough around projects in an organization. And that was followed by 24% of executive support. And we've all probably heard ad nauseum in our jobs, the seat at the boardroom table. But I thought it was more interesting to actually say it shouldn't be the boardroom table. It's about being part of those projects and part of that project team. What do you see happening? Maybe go back to Derek. Again, in your experience, maybe the Brazilian World Cup as an example. How did you make sure that procurement was at the integral part of that project?
So I think, Brazil, whether we talk Brazil or whether we talk South Africa, very similar, except Brazil's a lot bigger. One of the mistakes that we made in 2010, for example, was not involving the right people at the right time and early enough. And I think what we actually saw in 2010 was that we thought that other people could actually do it better than us. So what happened in 2010 is we thought that the Europeans can actually provide services to us. They did provide services to us inefficiently, ineffectively, and what happened, it cost us money. So what we did is we rather looked at how do we localize, and again it was localizing risk and risk mitigating. And what we saw in Brazil is it's actually better to diversify, and instead of doing centralization, rather go and look for autonomous people that are content experts. Give them a framework in which to operate. And if they understand the framework in which they have to operate, and they are a strategic partner to you, they will deliver to their best of their ability. And I'm not discounting things like agreements. Get your agreements right, understand your agreements. All of those basics need to be in place. But that's what we actually found is, and again, I have to come back to the financials because it was driven financially. One of the most important things, and unfortunately we didn't cover in that earlier slide, but one of the slides that Oxalys put up was to say what was the representation or who was participating in the survey that we're talking about over here. A critical slide. Okay, and if you look at the participation, the people participating in that slide, a very small percentage were C-suite people. Very small percentage was your executive. The difference that we had, for example, in our organizations, our particular organization, and then Brazilian World Cup, is you had 100% support from your chief executive officer and your chief financial officer. 100% support. That's a big difference. So, I mean, what is a CFO? It's critical.
Absolutely.
Because that's what actually makes the difference financially. And those are the people that actually ensure that it trickles down throughout the entire organization. So that's really some of the dynamics, you know. So again, I think that slide was a very important slide. Unless you've got support from your executive, I think you've got a bit of an uphill battle trying to fulfill the functions that you want to fulfill.
I think the challenge is to show, you know, making that value that they can't ignore that you need to be in that room.
Correct.
So just moving, I'm conscious of time because we've still got some really interesting things to cover. This, you know, again, might not be too surprising for one sitting in the room, but this was really an assessment of procurement maturity and performance within the organizations that participated. So you can see there that you've got your 50%, kind of rated their procurement team as just bringing the right goods and services at the right time. So there was very little strategic intent. And then you're sitting, you know, very small percentages getting anywhere near strategic. In fact, in the 2019 statistics, you went and compared, you know, there was 54% was still sitting at tactical. So still a big gap here for procurement teams as to be operating. So, you know, we can't be at the boardroom table or at the C-suite if we're still sitting too tactical. I mean, what do you think about that, Lerato?
Yeah, I think, you know, procurement maturity also depends on the maturity organization and how you measure the performance thereof. And it's not a surprise that the majority is still sitting on tactical, and because, you know, there's a study that Forrester did also measuring similar metrics, that about 40% or so or more are organizations that are still within the tactical to intermediate, maybe least matured, whereby the performance that is tracked there, it's literally PO cycle time, percentage of, you know, cataloged, PO cataloged, how you get back to business, versus looking at things that are more strategic that will enable the business to be seen as a profit center versus procurement being seen as an expense center in a way. So if you are not positioning procurement at that level, where you drive these digital platforms and strategic sourcing to enable the business to drive the same type of objectives, that if you need, you know, to deliver something at maybe whatever period, then procurement comes in to help you in that particular, then you are almost uplifting it from being tactical to strategic, because then you're sitting at the right tables and your methodologies are right and you employ the highly qualified experts to deliver as such. So if we drive that shift, it does make sense to where it is at now.
So is it a case that the more you digitize your procurement team, the more it allows for strategic activity? I'm throwing that one out. I didn't prepare anyone for that one.
I think it's a combination. You know, it depends on what you define as digital. You know, so if we define data analytics as digital, that's a very important part. If you define e-platforms as digital, that's a fundamental part. Does it make it strategic? It depends on whether you actually have the right outlook. And I'm talking again to the delegates in the room. So if you actually want to be forced to do price negotiations, and that's what your entire life is all about, is actually bring me the best price, I can tell you now you'll never move to strategic. Because what they will do is they will keep you at a tactical level for as long as you actually do tactical stuff. I think what you need to do is you need to move away from, you need to do the tactical stuff. Do it. It is fundamental to the organization to actually do it. But what you need to do is you need to actually elevate to the level of C-suite. And the only way we can do that is to get the right digital information visualized in a way that the C-suite can actually understand how important it is and how important the job is that you're doing. Because ultimately every single thing you do actually boils down to profitability of that organization. Show me the money. That's what they say to you all the time. Show me the money. And if you want to keep it tactical, you'll stay tactical regardless of what systems you put in place. So I think it's a combination of how you use your systems, how you align to the strategic intent of your organization, and who you actually talk to in your organization. Don't talk to the procurement people. You talk to one another all the time. Talk to your chief financial officer, to talk to your chief executive officer. But if you're going to talk to them, you better have the right information, or else they're going to give you 2 minutes and you're wasting their time. And the only way you're going to get that right is through the right digital platforms.
Yeah.
I also just want to add that
yes.
I think with the pandemic, it has also proved that procurement was actually the center. making things happen, having to make sure laptops are there, the supply chain, although the borders were stopped, but functionally the business still need to perform. So in essence, it is an agreement, it's a combination, and that's when we saw the uptake also.
And we definitely saw those organizations that had access to that immediate real-time data were able to make those quick decisions and be agile, as you spoke about earlier. I'm going to be in trouble with our conference manager, so let's move on. So the next section we looked at was just in terms of a call for more collaboration in supplier relations. And really what came up as very strong was, in essence, trust and honesty between suppliers and procurement. And we know typically maybe even a tender environment doesn't really allow itself to be that. Unfortunately, we're not really going to have much time to comment on that, but I think it's no surprise that if you want successful supplier relationships, you want to grow local businesses, that's what they're looking for. It's not just about price, it's not another ED program. And interesting, having a conversation around the digital side is, that again, digital can help that, because if you're on a system that's not just another database, we often see with the ESD side that it's like, oh, okay, I've got to register in another database, but I never get business. So a two-way environment procurement tool is very important.
Empowerment, definitely.
Very empowering, absolutely. Yeah. So another section that I'm pretty passionate about is sustainable procurement. And this stat was no surprise, but again, very interesting. So I really want the panel to comment on here. But when the respondents voted on here and gave their feedback, they kind of said, sustainable procurement is just local, procuring locally and making sure I don't spend any more money. No one took the angle to say, only 15% said it could actually increase my economic performance. And when you start to drill down on sustainable procurement, that's not the case. We're talking circular economy. So, Lerato, what do you think?
I think sustainable procurement is mostly exercised in different sectors where you can measure your environmental impact, ESG impact, maybe more popular in agriculture, FMCG, right? And less popular in public or service industries. And to keep the circular economy going, which is what the generic part of sustainable procurement means, is every procurement professional needs to take it upon themselves to make sustainable decisions day to day. And this speaks to even challenging ourselves to making sure that you issue purchase orders on time, you pay suppliers on time, because if you then do that, there's a flow in the circular economy to promote, the triple Ps at the same time. So it might not be predominantly being involved in the ESG policies because you feel like maybe it's not relevant, but you can make it relevant in the space that you're in through those smaller actions. Yeah.
Absolutely. Derek?
Debbie, it's a difficult one. I think if you look at ESG, very early days. I think a lot of decisions are being made without very serious thought in the entire process. These things get legislated, they get pushed down to us at a very, very rapid rate. And then what we end up with is we haven't got the processes in place to support some of the ESG requirements. I'm just going to use the agricultural sector for argument's sake. Just the other day, we have had, I think, something to the tune of 650 million rands worth of agriculture sitting on the borders in Europe, not being allowed in because of sustainable issues. Now, the thing is, you don't change a warehouse today, and tomorrow you've got a different warehouse. You don't do that. So what we need is we need time, and I think as procurement experts, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to understand what does sustainability really mean? What is the impact of sustainability? And I don't even want to go down the issues of coal, for example, or alternative energy. Those we can already see the impacts on us, and we can already see what that means from a costing point of view. Very early days, I think we better familiarize ourselves with what sustainability means to our businesses, your businesses. Because if we don't understand what it means, we're going to be reactive again in a year's time, maybe 2 years' time, and that's going to have serious repercussions on imports and exports. Because I think our country does a lot of that as well. So we've got some major issues, and I think we've got some major learnings that we're going to have to go through.
And important to remember, it's not just buying green. If I can also encourage the audience, there's a movement called the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. I think it might be in the conference manual. Look it up. And they think they have about 7,000 members that are procurement professionals from across the world. And I think if anything, we can be learning from one another to say, well, what does this mean in our profession and how do we make this a skill? So I'm going to skip across. I'm not going to talk around BE, CSR, because this is what I want to find interesting. And I'm going to ask Anne on this. So we look at the current state of digital transformation in procurement. Talk us through what your take is on these stats.
Yeah, so the good news is that we found out that 69% of organizations in South Africa have already started the process, the whole digitalization process, which is actually a good news for us. But then when we tried to look at when they started the journey, we found that it's pretty much late, because most of them, I can't really see the figures here, I'm sorry, 35% said that they started the journey in the 2010s. That is a bit late compared to what we have seen at a global level at large organizations, for example, in Europe or in North America, when they started actually in the 2000s with their ERP system, and then from the 2010, they started the shift towards more specialized cloud procurement system. So we are a bit late, but again, it's never too late, and we can see also that the COVID pandemic was a big catalyst for this whole journey, because a lot of organizations started to see the value of digitalization in procurement, because people were working from home, because they wanted to centralize all activities and spend in one platform. So again, sometimes it might take some few pandemics, or I would say major change for people and organizations to figure out what they need in terms of digital procurement. So that's good.
So the question is, what next?
Yeah.
Okay. So some of these strategies, I referred to this earlier, there's still 24% of companies using Excel. Probably really, really fancy Excel, but still using Excel, which is, given what is on offer, I found that quite surprising. But yes, I mean, there are barriers to digital transformation and realities that you're seeing within your own organizations. If you can see up there, budget restrictions, that's a given. But I also found that interesting, 36% is a lack of understanding of digital solutions. So, Derek, what would your advice be to the audience if they want to bring a transformation strategy into their organization?
Use what you've got and bring in what you think you're going to need that takes you to a digital platform. I know we talk about Excel, and we actually talk about Excel possibly as a bad thing. If you add business intelligence, okay, so Power BI to Excel, all of a sudden you've got visualizations that you've never seen before. So what you need to do is you need to take what you've got, understand how you need to get your budget for spend. Because I think your biggest limitation that you've got in terms of building new systems is, where do you get your money from? And the only way you're going to get your money is if you actually show the executive that you're giving them a return on investment. Show me the return on investment. If you give me a return on investment, I will give you the money to spend. It's always been like that. And I think, if you're costing me money, I'm not going to give you money. If you're giving me a return on investment, I will give you a contribution. And I think that's what you need to do. Use what you've got, build on what you've got. At the same time, look at what your key priorities are. What do you need to actually show the executive or the key people in your organizations? And how are you going to secure funding to get the right systems, digital platforms, that you require? I think yesterday, just off the subject, but it is very much part of it, is if we look at risk, one of the things that we talk about, we always talk about financial information, we always talk about spend analysis, we always talk about all of that information, but what we neglect to do is have a look at what are the supplier information, what does that supplier look like on the outside? And what we brought into our organization is we did social media scraping, and we did media scraping. And the funny thing is, I learned more about my supplier from a social media scraping point of view and a media scraping point of view than what I actually learned from a spend analysis perspective. In actual fact, it tells you up front, are you dealing with something that's red, amber, or green? And that's something so basic. It's got absolutely nothing to do with, it's got everything to do with digital. But somebody else is giving you that information on public domain information that already sits in the public domain, and you know nothing about it. And those are the kind of things, is what is important for your organization, prioritize, get the platforms that you want, and build up on what you've got currently.
You do know everyone's Googling themselves now, just to... What's out there?
It's frightening to see what actually comes up. Give yourself 5 minutes and you'll find out exactly who Anne is.
Anne, it looks like you want to add something.
Yeah, just one thing, because you actually discussed it a bit earlier, Direct, when you were talking about this whole return on investment, and I was saying, don't be afraid to have a phased rollout, because we know that there is a way to get some quick wins with any implementation. The quick wins are in the transactional part, right? It's when you place your orders, when your people will just go on the system, look from the right product on the catalog, things like that. So this is where you can literally have quick wins, because you are able to know what do you spend and how you can, for example, optimize the spend and find some cost savings opportunities, right? So those are quick wins. And this is a way to say to your executive, this is what we plan on going or on saving thanks to the implementation of the systems, right? Once you've done that and you have, I would say, confirmed that this implementation was beneficial to your organization, you can then move to the upstream part when your sourcing strategies is, when your contract management is, your supplier performance management is. And this is basically, for me, where the true value of procurement is, because at the end of the day, it's not only about going on the system and placing orders, it's about having this really strategic sourcing enabled by data, as you said, to be able to drive procurement the way it should be basically at the more strategic level. So yes.
I think you answered the question I wanted to ask, which was kind of, how do you bring the business case to the business? And so given that, I think we've had some answers on that. Lerato, I want to ask you, what about implementing the digital?
So I think for me, the implementation goes with how the business case was structured, and some of the important aspects to check before you even take on the digital journey is organizational readiness, organization-wide readiness, right? It's sometimes no use bringing a system that won't function when you integrate with other systems. And at the same time is the market readiness. You find that you're implementing systems that won't enable your supply chain, that will enable your suppliers to use the same systems that you want to intend to, perform at a particular level. So it's one of those things to consider, because you can also not source correctly due to how the scope was done, and now don't see the value back to what Derek had said. And now it continuously becomes an expense center. So that's the important things to check on as well in terms of the implementation.
Absolutely. And you actually touched on the slide that's behind there, just looking at these different strategies. And I mean, what we've noticed in the survey is that most have not reached upstream. And I think that's what you explained. You start here and then start to build the business case. So Rome wasn't built in a day, if I'm taking that out from what you were suggesting. So if we have a look at also just the next slide, kind of how much of South African organizations are using data to enable their strategic sourcing. And it's 76% that we're seeing. Derek, maybe again just to expand on what you said earlier. So yes, there's data, yes, you're using for strategic sourcing, but is that going to mitigate your risk?
Again, I think it comes back to maybe an earlier question. It depends on what your strategic intent is. If you're driving it tactically, so if you're actually strategically sourcing somebody based on pricing, you're going to get your pricing. It's as simple as that. So it depends on what you're actually basing your strategies on what you're aligning your strategies to. So if you want cheap price, if that's what that means, and I'm not saying that's what it means, but if that's what it means, you're going to find cheap pricing. If it means that what you want to do is you want to localize, and you want to localize, and you want to look at enterprise development, and you want to actually look at building your small to medium enterprise, and your micro enterprise, you better understand what your data priorities need to look like, because that's very different to finding the cheapest price out there. Very, very different. And you know, sometimes the cheapest price, you just come to Gauteng, and then I have to actually go and source, or I have to actually provide to the Northern Cape. The question here is, if I'm strategic sourcing the Northern Cape. Don't strategic source in Gauteng. Do it in Northern Cape. Do it in KZN and Eastern Cape. Very, very different. So I think, you know, it depends, again, on what the strategic intent of the organizations are. And sometimes, I think, guys, you need to man up and woman up, and you need to tell your executive that price is not everything. Price is not everything. And what we have to do as a country is we have to look at economic development. And the way you look at economic development is you take that strategic sourcing and you dissect it and you make it meaningful. It's not about price. And that's what I think I would put out there.
It's interesting you said, and I know we've got some of our Western Cape colleagues here, and I always find it really fascinating from their treasury side. They don't have so much BEE target in their procurement process. They have a localization target. So you procure from the local population. And by virtue of that, the demographics have worked out, in fact, exceeded. And it kind of talks to what you're saying, you know, strategically sourced within that particular area. And the other sustainable procurement, social economic aspects will actually almost fulfill themselves. So do I get a here from Western Cape? Anyway, so last but definitely not least, Anne, please take us through this last section where we're looking at opportunities and barriers to digital procurement. It's probably a lot to try and understand quickly, so can you navigate us through what the take-homes here are?
Sure. So we asked respondents that has already started the journey, what are the benefits that they are getting from their system. And most of them, actually 82% of them, are saying that they see a drastic improvement in process efficiencies. And again, this is basically basic stuff about implementing the system, to be able to have some tasks automated, for the tasks that cannot be automated, to be able to have some approval workflows set up, to be able to have reminder when that approver has not responded to your request, to be able to identify some bottlenecks, or just to have one system that would make sure that everyone within the organization will be able to follow the same process. And by doing that, eliminating any work span or eliminating any exception rules or things like that. So it's pretty interesting to see also that they have identified cost reduction. That's what we already touched on. And they have also identified improved decision making through visibility, and that's, again, go back to your point on spend analytics, Derek. And then we also asked, but wait, what could be the most limitation to the actual value that technology is bringing to procurement? And the main one is actually lack of understanding of those systems, and also lack of support from the executives. And this is basically what we just said about this way to articulate the business case to make sure that people are I would say, are able to go ahead to that executive and articulate the business proposition, the business value around this whole implementation. And when we also asked them this question, they said basically that what is really important is to be able to have embedded practices and processes within the actual software, because people are kind of lost now. People are saying, we don't really know what are the best practices for the whole industries. We don't know what are the best practices for our organization, so we need the system to guide us. And I would say, yes, that's true, but at the same time, you can't ask a third-party provider to tell you what is best for you, right? You have to be aware and benchmark basically what is going on within your industry to know that this is what I want to do and what I want to implement for my business, right? Of course, a technology provider will be able to challenge you. It will challenge your decision during the implementation. It will also be able to say, wait, you asked that, but wouldn't that be better to do that instead, right? And that is also what we expect from our technology provider. But you are the one knowing what should be best and what are the strategies that you want to implement and that you want the system to help us, to help you achieve when you do the implementation.
Excellent. I think also, and I'm sure we will be sharing this out, one of the comments made in the survey was that when you implement, it's the technology, but actually where you see it works is bring in the consultancy, which, benchmarking, and maybe it's a chance to clean up house and make a good implementation, but you can't put a good system on a bad process.
Just magnify the errors. Don't do anything like that, yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm just trying to look. We lost timer. Do we have any time, or are we at the end for questions? No time. Okay. It stopped counting minutes ago, but no one's lynched us yet. So thank you so much. I think by the reaction of the audience, this wasn't just stats. I think it really resonated with what's going on. And I do hope that our audience got some take-homes out of it. Thank you for the privilege of moderating. And I know we've kept you from lunch. I could hear the growling. So please enjoy lunch, and looking forward to the panelists are around for the rest of today, and I think tomorrow as well. So if you want to ask any more questions and just engage.
And grab a copy. Yeah, you can have a copy of the survey results. So please feel free to go ahead and grab your digital copy or print
I think it's at the Oxalys stand, right?
Yes, it is.
Excellent. And if you ask Nasi, we'll email it to you as well. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I get to dance off too.
Everybody.